Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, as we're near the end of Brexit year 0, I'd like to take a look at my top 10 reasons to oppose Brexit right now. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, Christmas Day's done, but it's Boxing Day in the UK, which is largely the same thing again, with maybe less eating and drinking, but we do get football instead. Only no football this year. But that's got nothing to do with Brexit. But you know what is Brexit? These 10 things. So not in any particular order of importance, my first one is the loss of decision making. The EU operate the most lucrative free trade area, really, certainly for us. As far as we're concerned, it's the most lucrative market we could possibly have in the world. It has rules if you want to join in. We do want to join in. And it is by far and away our most important market and will ever be thus. The people who think that we can just compensate by more trade elsewhere are living in a fantasy world. You know, there is neither the demand nor the money to compensate for the trade we had inside the single market. In addition, every trade deal we have struck since Brexit has been worth either the same as we had in the EU or worth even less. So we will, of course, need to have the lion's share of our trade with the EEA still. It has rules set down by the EU member states. We used to be a major player in that decision-making process and could make sure that the rules suited us. Now we make no decisions, and there will be rules to come that will harm our economic interests. We have no way of stopping them. We have no voting power. There are other rules that might be in our interests, but we have no way of supporting them either, getting them over the line. We've lost our seat at the table, whose rules we shall still have to follow in order to make money as a nation. And as I've said before, the people who moaned about EU rules, most EU rules don't actually apply to EU members. The benefits of membership is you don't follow most of the rules. We follow more EU rules now than we did when we were members, because most of them are for third countries. The second reason, and an obvious follow-on from that, is that we have reduced our level of trade. Brexit was calculated to represent a loss of about 4% of our GDP years ahead. All these people said, oh, the economists were wrong. No, they weren't. They said it was going to be a loss of about 4% to our GDP, which will be sustained in the long term. And economists are agreeing that the figures that have come out so far support that still. You know, think about how compound interest works as well. And consider that GDP growth is similar. So an average of a 4% drop in productivity each year on average will soon add up to an economy that diverges significantly from where it could have been, and not in a good way. And this calculation remains valid when this year's economic data was applied to it, as I say. In other words, Brexit is doing exactly what economists thought it would. Third, it's reduced our capacity to produce our own food. I mean, we have a particular problem in the UK that we do not produce enough key resources in general. Much of that has to do with the governments that we've had, you know, even inside the EU. We don't have, for example, our own publicly run energy companies. France do, EDF, and they operate in the UK. And we pay them money to supply us with energy that we could be supplying ourselves with. You know, with any profits made pumped back into our public services. But food is the most crucial, of course. Without energy, we're back to the Bronze Age, worst case scenario. Without food, it's the last days of the ancient Egyptian dynasties with the cannibalism and everything, when they were starving. And even that can't last forever. Thanks to a lack of workers to help on farms or in food processing facilities or transport or anywhere in the entire food supply chain, we are producing less food now than we did before Brexit. That doesn't just mean less food for exports. We can't sell as much. That is happening, you know, and obviously shrinking our economy, but less food to feed ourselves. This has meant having to import a lot more food from the EU in particular. A lot of the food you were eating yesterday, which may have been produced in Britain last year, is likely to have come from the EU if you didn't buy it well in advance and stick it in the freezer. You know, we have been dependent upon food imports for 2 or 3 centuries at least now. It made us particularly vulnerable, for example, during the Second World War, famously. But now we're even more reliant. Brexit has made us more reliant, and it's set to get worse. Not content with a hard Brexit hitting our capacity to actually feed ourselves, we have struck trade deals that mean foreign imports from Australia And in time, the United States, no doubt others, will undercut our own produce in our own market. So even as British farming shrinks to match the reduced workforce, and I remind people that farmers have planted fewer crops for next year, which is, you know, what's left of British farming is going to disappear altogether in a decade to be replaced, you know, I don't know, but what British farming is going to be in 10 years, but it's not going to be what it is now, and it's not going to be rewilding either, I can tell you that. And it will mean that we become almost entirely dependent upon food imports, and the quality of the food available will be lower on average. Fourth, it's led to inflation well above that of our immediate neighbours. You know, France inflation rate this year, what, about 2%, something like that. Same for Ireland, same for the Netherlands. It's a bit over 2% for Belgium, but still around about 2%. The nearest percent is 2%. It's actually about 1.5% for Denmark. They're not doing too badly on the inflation front. Right now, we're being told we're about 6% in the UK. At the end of this year, it's likely to have been about 6% when the final figures are in. Of course, inflation goes up and the cost of goods increases all the time. But commonly bought goods have gone up more in the UK than it has for our immediate neighbours. The cost of energy and food has increased massively. And that is particularly bad for those who already struggled to afford to live before this year. Fifth, this is the big one actually for me. If I was doing this in order of the impacts, this would either be the first or last, depending on which way I wanted to do it. But this is the big one. Brexit has allowed a coup in our own country. A Brexit government is tearing down democracy and democratic accountability. If Brexit were being pushed by a government with some regard for their own country, I could just keep plugging away, safe in the knowledge that the tide will turn over the next few years. A long way back even then, but at least we'd be starting to turn back to the right direction. But the Tories are cementing their grip on power. You know, there's a certain element of which you think, does it even matter if most people even become aware of just how damaging Brexit is, even if they have now? Because the government are now going to be deciding with their latest legislation which protests are valid and which are not. And they're making sure that there are serious penalties for those who oppose them. They're going to try and stop people voting at the next election who may be less likely to vote Conservative. You don't have to be a keen historian to look at what has happened in lots of countries around Europe, even in the past 100 years, and see the same pattern emerging here. Too many people thinking it won't happen here. You look at the other countries, what about this country, this country, this country? And they go, yeah, that was different. How is it different? Because that wasn't here. You know, take those in favour of Scottish independence, for example. Pleased that the Conservatives are helping their cause. Inevitably, there's going to be another referendum, and the Conservatives are making it much more likely that people will vote this time for independence. Sure, but are they? What if the government wins the next election handsomely and then before the next one just grabs power? Dissolves the devolved parliaments, tears it all down, complete control over the media, the administration, the courts, everything. You know, like I said, like has happened in so many other European countries in modern history. Who would stop it? Who? Who's going to stop it? At no point in modern history has a powerful country ever faced serious international action against persecuting their own people. Maybe the odd trade sanction, but nothing that removes them from power. You know, if we get to a point in a few years where the Conservatives feel confident enough to just grab power, no one will do anything about it. The EU won't do anything about it. The US won't do anything about it. They'll say it's wrong, sure. They won't do anything. And it doesn't happen all that often that countries do something, even when powerful countries persecute people next door, as Russia is likely to demonstrate soon if reports are correct. People should be a lot more worried than they are. The sixth is our loss of freedom of movement. Freedoms in general. But, you know, and this is particularly galling for the young. Nobody who was born in the 21st century even had a say in Brexit. But those who were born at the turn of the century are now just about finding out what they've lost. You know, it's, I say had no chance to vote on it. If only more had voted in 2019. But, you know, could have been different. But it does particularly affect the young people. No more freedom to study where you want, work where you want, live where you want around the EU. At least not unless you have a load of money to do so. Even then it can be tricky. Our younger generation will not forgive this. The problem is that by the time they act in sufficient numbers to have their voices heard, once they've grown up to the point where they're thinking, hang on, we need to engage in the democratic process here, we will have lost too much. Seventh, costing us our participation in international scientific research. We've got good research teams in the UK, very good, but they are being cut out of opportunities to create future advances in science and technology. Instead of attracting some of the brightest minds here, we will lose many of our own to countries that understand the value of international cooperation. Boris Johnson talks a lot about, oh yeah, we're gonna have a new golden age of British science. No, we're not. No, we're not. We're having new dark ages. Brexit was sold as a way to lead the world in green technology. Could have been, could be, but it won't. We've already been putting up barriers to scientific research. We've been making it harder. Researchers will take the path of least resistance and just move abroad. 8, it has divided friends and families in a way that has not really occurred since the English Civil War. You know, Brexit was made into such a big issue that people felt the need to aggressively argue their position, adopt a position, and it's the most important thing ever. And indeed, it is a big issue. Of course it is. But it was never worth breaking relationships over. You know, my partner, for example, refuses to discuss politics with her mother. That's how they make sure that they don't ruin their relationship. You can take that implication to mean they differ rather on this subject. You know, but other people not so pragmatic. And it has poisoned our society in general. But it's heartbreaking when you hear of close personal relationships or you see them destroyed by Brexit. 9, we've lost our international standing. Brexit may be in the interests of some foreign powers, but only those who are aligned against us. It was not in the interests of European powers. It was not in the interests of the United States. In fact, it has weakened our closest cultural and political allies. You know, as a result, the government that lies to keep the hardest form of Brexit in place is deliberately acting against the interests of those allies as well as ourselves. However, we can't openly just realign ourselves. All right, we've sacked off those allies, we'll find more allies. You know, we can't align ourselves with those who benefit like Russia or China. So we're stuck with a loss of international standing and influence around the world. We're not trusted. We're making no moves to rebuild that lost trust. In fact, we're weakening it every day. And finally, 10, it has resulted in our marketplace being a more hostile environment for our own producers than foreign ones. You know, I mentioned earlier, British farmers will be required to maintain high standards for their produce. Good. But foreign producers will not. They won't have to maintain those standards. So once the Australia deal is in force, for example, I know it's been signed now, but the major bulk of it doesn't come into force for about 10 years, they'll be able to sell goods in the British market that British farmers are not allowed to produce themselves because the standards are too low. And farming is just the most obvious example of this. We are destroying our capacity to trade in goods or even produce goods. You know, because some of the goods we produce, we need to get parts or raw materials from abroad. We're struggling to get that into the country. So we're having to get it into the country via more expensive means, which drives up the price of our products. It's not even like we can compensate by doubling down on our more lucrative trade in services, because our deals do next to nothing for those as well. But there we are. Those are my top 10 reasons for opposing Brexit. Are there any that you think should be in there? Let me know in the comments below, and until next time, I'll see you later.